This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On Air.
You're listening to the OI podcast, brought to you by the Otago Institute for Arts and Sciences, the Otago branch of the Royal Society. Dr Barb and Trudy are taking a break this week, so we've decided to replay an interview from late last year with Aaron Hawkins, chewing gum and walking. We think you're going to like this one. It's about doing more than one thing at once.
Welcome to the OI podcast, the Otago Institute podcast, in-depth conversations with experts from the worlds of arts, sciences and mataranga Māori, brought to you by the Otago Institute, the Otago branch of the Royal Society for Arts and Sciences. Kia ora, I'm Dr Barb, and today in the studio we are with Aaron Hawkins. Everyone, I'm sure, is well aware of Aaron Hawkins. Even Putin knows who Aaron Hawkins is.
Kia ora, Barb.
Kia ora.
I like how you have a different personality for the advertisement and then segue into a more energetic version. I did comedy shows when I was at university, and we had a guy who would do the introductions from off stage and introduce himself and then run on to do the opening bit, and that's what that felt like.
Oh, really? Oh,
thanks,
sorry.
Thanks for inviting me.
My husband calls it my radio voice.
Oh, it seemed very serious. Oh, this is going to be very serious.
It is very serious. It's a very serious show. It's a very serious show.
Great to be here.
Thank you very much for coming along. Hey, everybody knows you as the 58th Mayor of Dunedin.
Not everybody knows me as that.
Not everybody?
No, not everybody, no.
I thought so. And famously banned from Russia, am I right there?
I am unable to enter Russia. Yeah, which is a shame. You know, I've always had an interest in going to that part of the world, not at this particular juncture.
Oh, obviously, yeah.
but there would be, I mean, even before that, it was rather awkward. But yeah, it's certainly something that's worn as a badge of honour. When that list came out, the most feedback I got were from disappointed colleagues of mine from around the country who had managed to not get themselves banned from entering Russia.
Crazy, eh? Anyway, so you've had a long and esteemed tenure in Dunedin local politics. 3 terms?
Not that long, 9 years I spent
9
doing
years.
that. Yeah.
That seems like a long time. That's almost a decade.
Sometimes it felt like a long time. Yeah, two things happened in that period. One, I took on that work. I spent 6 years working on the City Council within 3 years as Mayor. Also had a small child during that period, and so it's hard to know which of the grey hairs deserve to be attributed to which of those causes. Right. But it was certainly a lot. And in the 3 years that I was in the mayoralty, we had a bit going on.
Yeah.
I remember in November, the election was in October, I think November, December, the water catchment up at Deep Stream, caught fire, and we lost 80%. So from that catchment, the city draws about 80% of its drinking water on any given day, and we lost that catchment, and because of the chemicals that were used in the firefighting effort,
right? The
estimates at that point were that we may not be able to use it for another up to a year plus.
Oh my gosh!
I thought that's pretty dramatic. What could possibly be more dramatic than that? And then in March, obviously, no one was allowed to leave their house.
Yeah,
and we had to navigate.
Because I think a lot of people don't realise that actually your run as mayor, like looking back, it just seems like they were separate things. But actually, that almost entire run as mayor was during COVID.
Yeah. I mean, January, February, we were getting kind of early indications from other countries. Yeah, that's right. And then March, our government responded appropriately, in my view, and tried to buy us time, essentially, and we went into lockdown.
It's always great to talk to you and to pick your brain about things wide and...
Sounds ominous.
It does, yes, it does sound ominous, but actually it's not that ominous. I thought you're now a recovering elected member, as I have read, which I thought was a very good turn of phrase. Hey, what we're really here to talk about is housing.
Yes.
And I've seen lots of really cool pictures of the Escarpment Domes. So I'm just going to touch on the Escarpment Domes first, and then we'll move on to your new position here, which follows on from your time as mayor, because while you were the mayor, you were the chair of, I'm just going to remind you of this, the Council's Grants Committee and the Community and Culture Committee. Community and Culture Committee? Have I got that right? No. The Refugee Steering Group and the Mayor's Task Force for Housing.
Yes.
So it's really the Mayor's Task Force for Housing, which we're going to... I don't know what that is. What was the Mayor's Task Force for Housing?
Those are all jobs that I've had, but not at the same time. The Mayor's Task Force for Housing was set up by Dave Cull when he was the Mayor, and I chaired it. So it wasn't...
so it wasn't while you were mayor, it was while you were a DCC.
No, but it was...
Councillor.
It sat within my remit as chair of the Community and Culture Committee, but it was set up in that 2016 to 2019 term, and pulled together a range of people working in housing, so community housing providers and social service providers and council and mana whenua and property managers. So we had real estate people there, which was a quite a useful perspective, and
quite a holistic approach on the whole issue of housing, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. And Community Housing Aotearoa, which is the peak body for the community housing sector, they came and helped essentially facilitate it, and we had a range of discussions.
And so, what was the outcome? What was the aim?
A lengthy report was the outcome with a lot of recommendations,
right?
Which council approved, and it has essentially been translated into something simpler and more productive in the City Council's Housing Action Plan, which is a far easier way of mapping out what its priorities are and so the Housing Action Plan is a sort of a high level plan that looks at what the objectives are, and this is sort of
this is talking about social housing, though, isn't it?
No, just housing in general, and then the city has sort of what they call an annual work plan. So these are our objectives, and then in each year they put up a thing saying, well, this is what we're going to do. And it's the same as how they've managed things like the play spaces plan. It's like, okay, here's what we're trying to do with playgrounds. This is what we're going to do this year, next year, the year after that.
And that all feeds into the long-term plan.
As tangible expressions. Well, they are funded by it's the other way around. So you put money in the budget, and then you come up with a plan of how you want to allocate that money, basically. So but no, it's not just about public housing or social housing, but one of the most powerful recommendations in the Mayor's Task Force for Housing report, and it came across into the Housing Action Plan, is that council would prioritise its effort where there is the greatest need. So from an equity point of view, where is the greatest need? It's probably not the provision of 2-hectare rural residential blocks on this peri-urban fringe. That's probably not the area of greatest need.
Right, because we have quite a lot of those.
Well, there's always demand, but that's not. That doesn't mean that's where you focus your effort. The effort is and we talk about in housing. We talk about housing continuum, and which goes from basically homelessness at one end to home ownership at the other end, and there's a range of steps through there from kind of market rents and subsidised rents and shared equity, rent to buy schemes and so on, all sit at different points on the spectrum. But
I think that spectrum goes a bit further at the other end though as well, because there's also multiple house ownership,
multiple property ownerships. Yeah. And so that was that was the most powerful thing. It's like, well, we're going to focus on where there is the greatest need in our community, because that's how you get the most equitable outcomes. And so that's...
People will accuse me of being very socialist, but I don't think there's any call for people having more than one house until everyone in our society has some place to live.
Yeah, that's... I told the story. Paul Coffey, who worked for a long time in the community development team at the Dunedin City Council and was supporting us on this work when we would do it. We'd have these conversations with him, and it was all very, all very above board. And then you talk to him afterwards, it's like landlords should be banned. There's no room for private landlords. It's a blight on our society that this is something that has had to cater to the demand. But so that's... I don't know what I've lost track of the question.
Sorry.
Because you went on to a property portfolio thing. That's all right.
Anyway, so we're talking about... We're going to come back to the Escarpment Domes later on.
Okay.
But we're going to go straight into your new job. What is your new job here? You've just been appointed.
Oh, I see.
As a new job?
So, background, about 10 years ago, a bit longer now, in response to... No, I'll start differently. When I started in local government, which is around about 2010, I stood in 2010 unsuccessfully, but as a result of that became invested in local government. And at that time was renting a house, as increasingly people are.
But you were also quite young then in 2010, right?
I was 25, 26.
Yeah.
The biggest issue really in terms of Dunedin's housing issues was housing quality.
Right.
So we've poor...
And anyone who's been through university...
Sure, yeah.
will appreciate that, yeah.
In my first flat on Castle Street, if you really tried hard enough, you could reach the fridge from sitting on the toilet.
Oh my goodness.
So the quality of housing and the effects that it has on human health were the biggest concern. All this housing that makes people sick, and Presbyterian Support commissioned some reports on it called things like old, cold and drafty, and just setting out the issues with that. And as a response to that, an organisation was set up called the Cosy Homes Trust, which included Presbyterian Support and the Dunedin City Council. The Otago Regional Council were involved for an interesting reason, because some of the things that help address the quality of our housing, include the installation of clean heating devices, which has a flow-on benefit to their work in that it helps reduce air pollution. Right. So if people are not burning coal or wood and are using heat pumps instead, then that's a positive outcome from the Regional Council side. Right. So they were involved early on. And so the Cosy Homes Trust focused on... So
this is a non-profit trust?
Yeah, it was set up as a not-for-profit organisation. It was funded by ORC and DCC Community Trust, and it did mostly focused on supporting ECA's programs. So energy something. It's a government agency that is tasked with improving energy efficiency outcomes. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. It's very early.
But they run a program called Warmer Kiwi Homes.
So they do a lot of insulation in homes, don't they?
Yeah, which subsidises the installation of insulation and of clean heating devices. And so they provide top-ups, depending on where you live, of up to X percent. And
is this still ongoing, this project? And it's like retired folks or people on low incomes or people on... I think there's categories for it. Landlords maybe can do it as well for renters. I'm asking Aaron questions that he doesn't know the answers to.
No. No.
I don't think you're on this board anymore, right?
Well, eventually I'll answer it. But
sorry.
Okay, so the Wōmakiwi Homes program is a subsidy program that is run by ECA nationally, but what happens is in some parts of the country, local funders come in and say, well, that's still too much of a barrier for people in our community, so we're going to chip in a bunch of money and make it free to get installation done, or take it up to 90% for heating or whatever. And so that's what's happened here in Dunedin, and so we were involved, Cozy Homes were involved in administering that program to make it easier for people to be able to access it. Is it still running? Yes, it managed to survive the great bloodletting that was the budget in 2024, and I think they've got another been given another 3 years of funding, so that's great. Last year, but yeah, it's basically it's an overly bureaucratic system because people have an aversion to universality, and so everything has to be targeted funding based on need. So it was available to people, homeowners living in decile 8, 9 and 10 areas, which is just a crude metric of a socioeconomic metric of your neighbourhood based on census mesh block data. Last year they...
So 8, 9 and 10 in this sense are poorer people or richer people?
Lower socioeconomic areas.
Right,
yeah. Decile 8, 9, 10. Last year it got expanded to include decile 7. So
because in the school system it goes the other way. The decile 1, 2, it's just very confusing.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. So lower social...
Or people who have a community services card living anywhere. But it is only available to homeowners. It's an artificial distinction, really, because we know that properties move in and out of private ownership, move in and out of being rental properties, etc. And also, I mean, generally the response is, well, landlords should do that work, but we know that they aren't. So do you suck it up and do their work for them? That's probably the best public health outcome. The categories and criteria have changed over the years, though. At one stage, rental properties did qualify, and for whatever reason, and you'll have to ask a landlord, the uptake from landlords was quite low for their free insulation and or subsidised.
So strange, eh?
Because
it's in essence, it's
a capital investment.
Yeah,
I would have thought so.
I would have thought they would jump at it.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
So now currently not, which is a shame. But so it's as much about helping people navigate the system as anything else. So that's been going. For a number of years. We've been involved in doing that, as well as that doing kind of community outreach. So going and, we had staff who would go and do workshops at the Valley Project about how to make better use of your curtains, that sort of stuff to try and it's partly about health outcomes and partly about energy efficiency and saving people money. If you don't have to spend as much money on heating your house, then that's surely a good thing. And that was the bulk of the work that Cozy Homes were doing, and I came on to the board in 2019 because Dave Carl had been the DCC rep on that board, and he asked me if I would do it, and so I did. And then a year or two later, I became the chair of that board, so I looked the wrong way at a meeting. And we got to a point where our manager left and we hadn't recruited for a new manager, and we were thinking about, and I don't think enough organisations have this conversation, does this organisation need to exist, or can what we are doing be delivered by someone else and have one less treasurer and one less set of annual accounts and so on and so on. And twice I went into a board meeting with the intention of winding up the organisation because it seemed to be the path we were heading down. And at the last minute, someone said, well, we should probably ask the community what they want us to do. And so we thought that seems like a good idea. So we called a meeting of people involved in housing and had a facilitated meeting essentially asking, not quite in such explicit terms, but the options are we can wind up this organisation or we can do heaps more. And you'll be shocked to learn, Dr Barb, that the community feedback was you should do heaps more.
Right.
And so it's like, okay, so that's fine. So what
Well,
is
that's good though, right? Because that gives you a mandate. People actually want this thing that you're providing, right? So you're not just kind of sitting around
that's right. No,
doing things for people who can take or leave it, right? It's a useful thing because people actually want it.
Yeah. So then we spent a year working with them on, well, what does that look like then? And where we got to was a new structure, which is the Otago Housing Alliance, and it is essentially a very small organisation that supports a much wider network. So, we will have, I work on this part-time. We will eventually recruit a part-time manager person, and we have a volunteer board, and that's essentially it. And then a kind of advisory group will be appointed in the new year as a way of bringing in a range of people and perspectives to inform the work and the decisions that the board are taking. But the network itself is vast. It's public health academics and community housing providers and chimney sweeps and builders and health health organisations and membership bodies like Age Concern and OUSA and people like that. Basically anybody who has an interest, architects, anyone who has an interest in being a part of the solution, coming together and drawing on each of our strengths as a kind of in a way of building collective impact to address the problem. And there are three broad areas that we think that we can offer. One is around research, and we have a fantastic resource locally, obviously, in terms of our education sector. One is around innovation, which is essentially how can we work together in ways that how do we do things differently to get better outcomes. And a great example of that, going back to the Mayor's Task Force for Housing in 2019, we, as part of that, at the end of that process, we had a housing summit at what is now Tuhura, Otago Museum, and we had presentations from the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, Kāinga Ora were there, Salvation Army were there, the prefabricated housing people came and presented. A whole lot of people were there, but in the audience we had not just the usual suspects from the social services sector, but we invited property developers and we invited people with a commercial interest in development. And one of the people in that room was Russell Lund, and the Salvation Army gave a presentation, and MHUD gave their presentation about how they were working with private developers, giving them the security of a long-term lease and a reasonably reliable tenant, i.e. the Crown, as a way of being able to build more capacity in public housing rather than the government building everything.
Right. So instead of Kāinga Ora building houses, it's the government.
So the developer builds them, and then but they work with a community housing provider who then run them, and they have access, and the tenants have access to the income-related rent subsidy. So, there's a
sort of subsidised renting for the tenant.
Yeah. So essentially
and the landlord is getting like a guaranteed tenant, basically.
You end up being paid market rents for the room. The tenant only has to pay up to a fixed percentage of their income, and the IRRS, the income-related rent subsidy, tops that up to pay the rest. Right. So that is what makes it commercially viable. Right. And you have and they were 10, 15, 20 years, whatever the arrangement is with the government. So you have you may not make commercial return, like you could make more money commercially. Possibly, but there's a trade-off there with knowing that you have security of tenants and security of tenure. And as a direct result of that meeting that we had at the museum and those people being in that room earlier this year, the old Lona Mercantile building, which Russell had owned for a number of years and had various plans for it as an apartment building, opened. And there are now.
So that's the one on the other side of the railway station.
Yeah, that's right. And so
it used to be, what was it, a roller rink or
a go-kart place?
Go-kart place, yeah.
Yeah. And so there are 30 new affordable rental places that wouldn't have existed otherwise, that he built as a private developer, that the Salvation Army are running, and that the tenants have their rents subsidised by government. Now, that as a model is the sort of thing, those are the sorts of things we're talking about in terms of, well, how do we innovate, how do we work collectively, how do we design solutions that work for us? Because the government have made it quite clear that they don't see it as their job, and we're seeing that with Kaingaora walking off a number of developments, not just here in Dunedin, but
particularly here
everywhere.
in Dunedin. Dunedin's I'm at Port Chalmers out
down
there,
there,
and that's crazy what's happening there. So Kaingaora they own a bunch of houses down there that they were all rented. And they decided this is inefficient because they're the wrong sort of houses for what the current needs are in Dunedin, and all the houses are old and they're beyond renovating to a standard that's acceptable. And so they had decided they had too big a sections for the houses. It would be more efficient if they knocked down all the houses and built more on the same site, which effectively was a good idea. They got halfway through it, and so some people are moving into half of those houses, but because it's more efficient to if you're going to knock houses down and do all of that deconstruction type part, they had gone through that for all the houses. They've rebuilt half of them, and then they've just said, okay, no, we're not going to do the other half. And so now there's just this big empty section in Port Chalmers, which previously had houses and tenants on it, which loved living there. And Kaingaora had said, no, we're going to make new and better and more housing by removing these. But now the current government has gone back on that budget, even though that was already budgeted. So they're just paying the defaults now for all the because the work was all contracted out. So they're paying the defaults rather than build those houses. So Port Chalmers has now lost net housing for Kaingaora out there, which is a crazy situation.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess that's a government decision. That's a political decision where they've decided that that's not where they want to put their money. They want to budget money to other things.
No, well, that they've been pretty clear in that they see, and on the one hand, I appreciate the.
When you say they, you mean Kaingaora, or you mean the government?
The government,
yeah.
Who set the priorities for KO.
KO in this case not meaning knockout, but meaning Kaingaora.
Yeah. They have said we are going to focus on emergency and transitional housing. And on the one hand, yes, that is clearly where there is the greatest need. You can't argue that that's not the case. But, as Lyndon Johnson said, you can walk and chew gum at the same time. You can do more than one thing.
Right.
And I do think that the government should be involved in building public housing. They've decided they're not going to do that, and that it's up to communities to lead on local solutions. Sounds great. The other problem at the moment is that there's a fair degree of uncertainty in that they aren't particularly. There's no clarity or certainty in terms of accessing the income-related rent subsidy. So, if you're saying we, government, the Crown, aren't going to build more houses, it is up to the community sector to do that. But at the same time saying, well, we're not sure if we're going to make the existing subsidies available to new community housing developments, i.e. you'll either have to subsidise it yourselves or charge people market rents. Neither of those things really match the stated ambition, which is to increase the supply of affordable rentals for people who need them.
And I guess the other option is that it passes the financial burden of providing housing, social housing, to the regional and local government as opposed to the central government, which has an impact on people's rates, right?
Well, they've been pretty.
I mean, when you say community in this sense, the community is Dunedin community as a whole.
Yeah.
Which I guess if DCC and ORC step in like they did with Cozy Homes and they're helping with the funding options, that all goes back to the rates of the people here.
Oh, yeah. The last national government when they introduced the income-related rent subsidy, they made it explicit that tenants of houses that were owned by local councils didn't qualify.
Oh,
So the DCC owns close to 1,000 units. None of those tenants qualify for income-related rents, which means that the city has to set rents at a level that they think that those tenants can afford, whereas if it was owned by a community housing provider, that they would be able to set market rents and claim the income-related rent subsidy the tenants would, which would mean you'd have more money for repairs and maintenance and the upkeep of that, et cetera, et cetera. And it was a pretty clear steer in terms of they didn't believe that local councils should be involved in the delivery of public housing. And
so they don't want to do it, but they don't want local councils to do it either.
No, it should be done by the community.
And by community,
sector.
they mean private.
No, community housing providers are people. I mean, the Salvation Army is one of the biggest ones, but
non-profit. Organisations.
Yeah.
But then it's a bit odd, isn't it, having non-profit organisations doing it, because they don't pay taxes, do they? Or do they?
I'm not an accountant.
No, I was wondering if they're like charities. It's funny in a way for a government or a local body of any sort to say, okay, there's clearly a need for this. We clearly need this, but we're not going to do it.
Yeah, I think what they want...
It's a sort of a strange position to take. On one hand, saying there's clearly a need for something, and as the government, we're just not going to do it.
Oh, that's nothing new, is it? But yeah, they wanted, and this is what's happened in other places. So Dunedin's pretty much the last significant landlord in local government. So Wellington last year transferred, because they were the second last one. They had somewhere around 1,000 plus units. They transferred all of those into a community trust, so those are not directly owned or run by the council anymore.
Right.
And so that was the pretty clear intention under the previous national government. The Labour-led government had no interest in changing those settings as much as we tried, and
There's no real reason why. I mean, just because everybody else in the country doesn't do it, there's no reason why Dunedin City Council can't continue to be a landlord
no reason. No,
at all. It's completely separate, right? I mean, it's a trend that's across the country, so there's obviously something pushing that trend, but there's no reason that...
Oh, it's a financial decision.
Right.
So, you say... So basically your options are either you transfer all of your ownership into a community organisation, and therefore you can raise more money through rents for the maintenance and development of those properties, or you maintain direct control and ownership of them and acknowledge that you will have to, that we all, I'm happy to chip in, pay for the...
As a community, we help those people who find it more difficult to have housing,
Well,
with the ultimate aim that all the people in our community or our immediate society have a roof over their heads.
And the City Council's had a policy for many, many years that said that it should pay for itself. The public housing portfolio should wash its face, and that the rents that were charged should pay for everything that needs to be done. And that
wash its face? That's a very strange saying. I think I've heard that before.
And that became more and more. That became less and less possible, and if in essence, council was in breach of that policy because it was having to, especially through the necessary requirements to upgrade rentals through the healthy home to meet the healthy home standards. It's like there's no way that the rents that were being charged were going to be able to meet those costs. So they changed the policy that said, now we are prepared to. We accept that there is a public good element in making housing available to people who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford it, and so we will pay X percent of the cost of this portfolio as a public good. So we don't need it to, and
we don't need it to return a profit.
This is sorry. This is so everything that all of the things like when council sets its fees and charges for everything, whether it's entry to the pool or rents for your public housing, you have to do an assessment which says how much of this is a public good, i.e. it's great that people are less likely to drown if they have access to swimming facilities, and how much of it is a private good, i.e. I have fun going to the pool. Yeah. And you use that as a rough metric for how much of it is covered by entry fees and how much of it is covered by rates subsidies, effectively.
Right, yeah.
And so that's in theory, the council's position was 100% of our community housing portfolio is a private good, so the tenants should pay for all of that.
Right.
And we changed that basically to say, well, we actually do think there's a public good element in making housing available at affordable rates to older people who need access to that. And so that's basically how that shifted.
Right.
It's a really exciting side quest into the levels of service requirements of the long-term plan process.
No, it is actually quite interesting because I think that the detail of this always gets lost, right? And it's actually the detail that determines what happens. And it's not just old people in these 1,000 houses, is it? You said old, or is it largely retirement?
It's older people's housing,
right? So what I'm dying to get onto, is why do we still have homeless people in Dunedin? And do we have an estimate of how many there are? And what is our current plans to do something about that? And will this new body that you're part of somehow fix that? Or is it mostly about insulating and cleaning up houses that are already in existence?
I counted 7 questions. I'll try and answer them. So homelessness is, as I mentioned before, clearly the area of greatest need. But the other questions are harder to answer in terms of how many people are affected by it, because it's hard to measure, because it's not all people sleeping rough or sleeping in tents down at the Oval. It's people who are couch surfing. It's people who are staying with family, and
it's transient as well, right? So it's like people can be different degrees of homelessness at different times.
Yeah. And so the starting point, and it's not what's the word I'm looking for? It's not ever a satisfactory answer, but the starting point is finding out how many people there are that you need to help and getting a better understanding of who they are. And so council, through its housing action plan, have adopted what's called a functional zero approach to homelessness. And as its core principles are that homelessness shouldn't be inevitable, nor should it be permanent. And so how do you, and if you accept both of those things, how do you support people how do you support people out of homelessness? And the approach is essentially a sinking lid approach. So the goal is that in any given month you have more people exiting homelessness than you do have entering it, if that makes sense. Because as you say, it will always be fluid. And how do you make sure that all of the agencies and all of the people who are working in this area are using the same data set and have access to the same information and so on.
And they're all working together, basically.
Yeah,
and so that's the best outcome.
Yeah, so that's now happening, and they are developing a far better data set. That's a structural thing, though. It doesn't. I appreciate that. It doesn't help necessarily. It's a longer term view. It's not an overnight fix. And I think if there were easy solutions, we would have done them by now. And so it's always going to be messy and complicated. But I think having a consistent approach where people are working together on trying to address these things is...
What is the biggest barrier to people who are currently homeless now just having a place to stay, even if it's not, like even if it's a temporary place until they find somewhere better, there must be better accommodation than a tent on the Oval or sleeping rough. What's the biggest blockage?
Well, the answer to a lot of these questions is that we need more houses to be built, and we need support for people, and that's the easy bit in some ways, and we need support for people to be able to live meaningfully and basically helping people to be good tenants, because they that's not necessarily something that not necessarily a skill set that people have. So you can't just put someone in a house and then wander off and hope for the best. You know, you need people to be able to, and that's the...
So it's that support system once they've actually got a roof over their head that allows them to overcome whatever the challenges were that possibly were the driver for them being homeless in the first place, right? But it seems to me that, I know the Finnish government have got a really cool system in place, and I know that...
Tax?
Yeah, tax. No, so what they do is they go, okay, so first people need security of somewhere to live that's dry. It's got it's got access to a shower. It's got access to, a proper sanitary conditions and a roof over their head, so they're warm and dry. And then they kind of wrap mental health, addiction, whatever is required around that person. So they've got the support then that they can then work to, as you were saying, become a better tenant or, have that security of housing. But it's like people don't become homeless for no reason, right?
No.
There's
So there are, and
generally some sort of driver behind. And I kind of often think once you're in that situation, like it's really hard to hold down a job if you don't have a house, right? Sure. Like if you don't have a place to hang up your clothes and they're always wrinkled, and you don't have a place to wash your clothes and all that stuff, it's a slippery slope. So it's kind of like, in order to go back, like in the ecology terms, we would talk about a threshold rather than a gradual decline. So you've got a tipping point there. And then it's really hard to get back. So you need a lot of effort to push that. In this case, it's not an ecological system, but a person. You need a lot of kind of support to get them back in the place where they are stable enough.
Yeah, there's a couple of things, So there are things that you can do that are effectively Band-Aids that can help people in the current circumstances in which they find themselves, which is totally necessary and good, so long as you're also trying to build a longer-term infrastructure that supports people. So there are organisations. There's an Australian organisation called Orange Sky, who are now operating in New Zealand, and they are effectively a social service provider that set up showers and washing machines and make them available for people to be able to, as you say, shower and wash their clothes, and they have, and their staff are trained to be able to talk to be able to talk to them as human beings, and if they've got a sense of where other need might be able to redirect them to other support mechanisms that exist and so on.
Right.
So that's a great example, and so they've set up. They've been in Auckland and Wellington, maybe somewhere else in New Zealand. Relatively,
but we don't have them in Dunedin.
No. So those are the sorts of things that would be worth investigating, I think, as a like I say, it's a Band-Aid solution. And then you've got facilities like Homeground in Auckland, and I'm going up to meet with some people in a few weeks to look at these sorts of models. And Homeground took a long time to build, but as a project of the City Mission up there, and essentially is what you describe. It is accommodation that they have built for people, and also have it staffed with people who have the expertise to be able to provide that kind of that wraparound support for people who are living there. And I think that's, those are the sorts of things that we need to be looking at if we are serious about providing support for people.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like I don't know. I know I'm saying it in a very trivial way. It seems like a really simple solution. But I think, like, when I see reports of people living rough in tents in the Oval, and I think, okay, why can't we just have somewhere, like a big dorm room with showers and things and the appropriate support people there where, and I know it's Band-Aid and I know it's not the end, but it's also really cold in Dunedin over winter and that's not good for anyone to be sleeping out there. So I just sort of think, I don't know, there must be that Band-Aid solution that can't cost society as much as it costs us knowing people don't have a roof over their heads in the middle of a Dunedin storm.
Yeah, it's a tricky... The accounting thing's interesting, because you are right in that it costs society, if you want to put a dollar figure on it, far more... The status quo does cost far more than many of the alternatives would. But the people who would save that money aren't the same people who are building the infrastructure to say... You know what I mean? And look, if people were particularly interested in, even within the health system, saving money, then we'd see a hell of a lot more money put into preventative medicine.
That's true.
But we're not interested in that. We're interested in a graph telling us how many elective surgeries may have been performed in any given year. So it's because, I mean, you're right, whether it's justice or health or whatever, it's far cheaper, if you want to be crude about it, to look after people properly than it is to leave them to fend for themselves and then deal with the consequences of that.
I mean, it's not just me saying that, but like, for instance, this Finnish study, they've actually shown that, right? And if you ask people in Finland, because they do have taxes about 50%, but they have a really solid, it's not quite 50%, but it's roundabout. So they do have higher taxes, but they have a really solid education system and health system, and if you ask people, they're perfectly happy to pay those taxes. So because they're getting all of that infrastructure guaranteed and they know that the whole of society is getting it.
Yeah, all of these things ultimately are a political choice.
Yeah, it's quite
in terms of what we collectively value and therefore what our political representatives prioritise.
Yeah.
And so, that's at the highest level, that is the answer is that you need your community to build a mandate such that those who make decisions on our behalf feel confident that they can invest in things that work, as opposed to either A, ignoring the problem, or B, taking a more punitive approach, which is now what we're seeing. And look, we're now heading back to a situation where we will have no cause evictions for rental properties, which means anybody can get booted out of their flat at any point, and we know that will end up in having more people either living in substandard housing because they've got no leverage in that power dynamic with their landlord, or worse, homeless because they've been turfed out. So there are all sorts of other things that affect. And no
cause evictions means that your landlord can just say, okay, you need to leave without specifying a cause, which means that it's open to all sorts of abuse, right? If you ask your landlord to fix something and they don't want to fix it.
Well, it also means you can't assert your rights under the Bill of Rights. Because,
because then they just say, okay, well, I don't want to rent this anymore to you, so you have to leave.
Not because you're being discriminated against for whatever reason that is protected by other legislation.
So it's really quite, like, it's just not what it's written on the face. Like, the implications of a no cause eviction system means that it substantially, like, just erodes any tenant's rights, but it also then means obviously that tenants don't want to invest anything in the upkeep or the maintenance of the place necessarily because they could be evicted at any moment, right? So when you've got long-term tenancy, then you're more likely to keep the garden nice, for instance.
Yeah, there's a lot that comes with security of tenure that is good for people's well-being, and it should be encouraged, but that's not the situation we're in.
I'm just aware of the time here. We are running out of time. Hey, thanks so much for joining us, Aaron.
Thanks,
Have you got any last comments that you'd just like to add in there? I've been teasing the whole way through.
Do you have any last comments?
Yeah, well, sorry. I've been teasing the whole way through that I would ask you about the Escarpment Domes because I keep seeing them on Facebook.
Yeah.
And I think they're a fantastic idea. Obviously, it's the other end from homelessness.
It's a bit embarrassing. Yep. So, I'm working on a project in Pukeroa Bay called Escarpment Domes, which is short-term visitor accommodation. It's a hell of a time to be launching a luxury goods business in the Greater Wellington region. But it's the kaupapa is that we are renting out geodesic domes that we've built in Pukeroa Bay and using the money from that to invest in pest control and native reforestation. So we're leasing 8 hectares of land up there as a pilot project, really, to test the appetite for the accommodation model. Also working with artists and commissioning work. So we've got sound installations and cut-out sculptural work and so on that's being developed up there.
And it's a gorgeous view.
Yeah, it's an amazing spot looking out over Kapiti Island. On a good day you can see Te Waipounamu and Mount Ruapehu, depending on which way you crane your neck. And ultimately the goal is to buy up lots of land, a network of sites around the country, up to 1,500 hectares of land, and plant it all out in native forest. It's an elaborate way of trying to make native forestry commercially viable in the short to medium term, because it's currently not. But also, a way of rethinking how we approach tourism and trying to develop tourism products that are... So it's all entirely off-grid, solar-powered, natural spring water, composting toilets, etc., etc. So how do we rethink? And that's another great opportunity that we ignored really through COVID. Is this is a great opportunity to rethink how we do tourism, and then we went straight back to doing it exactly how we always used to. But what can we do that provides those sorts of experiences for people without
wrecking the environment?
Them needing to travel as far. Yeah, that's right, and going lighter on the environment. So the Escarpment Domes is the first. And
can I just as a small quick question? Yeah. Why would 3 Dunedin boys build them in Wellington?
Oh, well, I'm the only one who lives here.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, the others are based in. Hugh lives in Pukeroa Bay and Blair lives in Wellington. I just sit in my kitchen table and write short sentences.
Right.
But,
And when you say we built them, you actually mean that you built them, like with your hands?
Not me.
No.
We've had professionals, and the dome structures themselves are just they're an assembled frame. You put an insulation blanket and a skin over, but we've had builders build proper platforms for them, and they're screw piled into the ground because it gets quite windy up there.
Right.
On the Kapiti Coast.
Who would have thought? Yes. Wellington windy. Hey, thank you very much for coming along today. I'll put the links for the Inspiring Communities, Cozy Homes, the Escarpment Domes, everything else. And just bear in mind that obviously Aaron is a recovering elected official. So when he's speaking about politics, he's speaking from his previous experience at politics and his current viewpoints, but not as a...
Why are you writing my disclaimers for me? I can take care of myself, Barb. Okay.
Hey, we've got a small koha here for you from the Otago Institute. It's a pseudopanax. Because I thought you love native vegetation and you're not adverse to a prickly companion.
I think I am usually the prickly companion. It's very kind of you. Thank you. And it's wrapped up, people won't appreciate this, but it's wrapped up in the Rothsay News with the 10 questions, easily the highlight of the month. A highlight of the month in the West Harbour, 10 questions in the Rothsay News. Thank you.
You've been listening to the OI Podcast, the shout-out for the arts, sciences and Mataranga Māori.
You can support this podcast by becoming a member of the OI. Check out the Otago Institute for Arts and Sciences on Facebook or our website.
If you'd like to listen again to this episode or others from the series, look for the OI Podcast on ORFM's website, oar.org.nz.
Brought to you by the Otago Institute for Arts and Sciences, the Otago branch of the Royal Society of New Zealand.
This podcast was produced by ORFM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.